Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Illustration Department podcast. My name is Giuseppe Castellano. In this podcast, I talk to folks in illustration, graphic design, publishing, animation, and other creative fields about their work, the lessons they've learned, and the bumps and bruises they've experienced along the way. In this episode, my guest is award-winning illustrator and writer, Jon Klassen. As an illustrator, finding your style is often a painful process. But what if better yet, what if Jon told you that it doesn't have to be? Among the topics, Jon talks about how mid-century UPA cartoons led him to a children's book career. We discuss why he can use quieter color palettes while you're told you can't. And Jon explains why illustrators should get into the habit of saying, I don't wanna. I hope you enjoy our conversation.
I can see my levels are doing stuff on the screen, so that's good.
Yeah, your levels are great. You sound great.
Okay, great. Cool.
That was easy.
Yeah.
Wow. What, have you done these kinds of things before or something?
You'd be like, if you saw my physical setup, you would think that like it looks like I'm in some sort of post-apocalyptic bunker or something. It's not a clean process. I did a podcast like a couple weeks ago where it was one of those fancy ones where they send you a mic. And so I'm sitting here
not
with
doing that.
No, this was like, and I didn't even know that happened. And they were like, no one's ever done that. And I was like, no, that's not a thing. But I've got this mic now. And so it's sitting here making me sound like I've done it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will never get to that caliber, I don't think.
I'm not sure I like it. I don't know if that seems like the whole kind of great part about these things is that you feel a little bit guerrilla-like, and it's sort of this lo-fi great way of doing this, right? And as soon as you're in the business of like sending mics to people, it feels like it breaks something about the handmade.
Right. I guess I need to talk to those people, because how much money are they making from their podcast that they can afford to send mics to and fro?
Yeah. Maybe it's like money laundering.
I'll look more into that.
Maybe there's a whole back end to it.
We don't talk more about money laundering later in the episode.
I hope so.
Dude, my setup, I'm in a closet. I accidentally 5 minutes ago dipped the charging part of my computer charger into my coffee. It's currently working, so I guess crisis averted.
Yeah.
I'm looking at all of my clothes in my closet. I have one of those those foam sound things, but I glued them to the backing, this cardboard backing of my son's science project back when he was in elementary school.
Oh, I love that.
Gorilla. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have the Gorilla.
I'm glad that science project. I'm glad to hear that they're still doing the giant science projects, though. My kids aren't quite there yet. They're still little, and so but I was actively wondering about the science project boards, if that's still going on. Good to hear.
It is. Yeah, the triptych thing.
Yeah.
Bent on two sides. Yeah. So
I'm pretty rambly on these things I've found, so that's good that you've got a pretty heavy knife, because I'll sound better for it, I think.
I do. Yeah, a little pacing goes a long way.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a children's book editor.
Yeah, exactly. We're in the business of entertaining. You gotta wield a heavy knife.
I struggle with that balance. I struggle with the balance of, talking to a guest and going all right, let's talk about how we can help illustrators get better with their work. But also I want to keep it entertaining. I listen to other podcasts and they talk about, sort of the nuts and bolts. And I've received emails over the years. Hey, can you talk a little bit more about your guest's process? And it's a fair question, and I do from time to time.
Like the physical illustration process, like the drawing and the materials and stuff.
Yeah.
I always feel like that doesn't make for good radio, does it? Really? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I guess we can talk about hey, you use ink, cool.
Yeah.
And graphite dust.
I think you probably get a lot of confusing feedback, or not confusing, but conflicting feedback. I mean, even Mac and I, when we would do stuff, I would feel like there was too much fluff, and they were like, no, it's the voice. We just want you guys are funny and the banter and this, and it's just but we're not I want to get to the, what you're talking about, where it's what's the, I want to get to the substance. We're in the business of substance here. And I think there's also a fear of, if the product becomes the product, for lack of a better term, becomes your personable voice or whatever your personality is, I'm way out over my neck where I want to be in terms of what I'm putting out there and what what this is, what this job is. And the sooner we get back to, even to that point, like even by then, graphite dust is a relief than me just being entertaining. Sometimes you must get it too, where it's like, we just want to hear you guys chat. And it's like, we got to get to something though. Like for people who who aren't necessarily as deep in this or as interested in you as a character, like pretend no one's ever heard of you before. Like that's always my premise.
Definitely. That is another sort of thing I do. Consider is too strong of a word. I don't know if I consider it often, but I do tend to think about it from time to time that this episode might be the first episode someone's listened to. I
mean, I hear that sometimes where I hear it from people I know or like from people who I meet at like conferences and stuff who was like, I didn't know who you were, but then I heard you on such and such. And you're like, that happens. It's probably a much bigger, of course you hear from the people who you know or who know you, but how many, like what's the 89% of people out there who have never heard of you and is like, oh, but that was listenable. You made some good points. What was that book again? What did you make? And you're like, that's exactly right. That's then you've won actually when you get those people and it's a cohesive conversation.
Yeah. So you have to balance that.
Yeah, I don't think I said, but thanks for having me on, man. This is really, really great. I was thrilled to get the call.
Yeah, you're like an up and comer, and I feel like I want to support people who I think have a shot.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Thanks. I don't ever get to talk about myself, so it's nice to have a chance to do it.
That's facetious, right?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Okay, because my God, I was like, I'm going to do research for Jon Klassen, and over the last couple of weeks, I've been I'm like, I haven't gotten to the bottom of how many interviews you've done.
I know it's not and it's not because of me pushing for that either. I think like if you've heard a couple lines twice in those things, I apologize because you do boil it down after a while, and like. It's it's one of those things where you're at the end of a cycle where you're like, maybe I got to stop talking and actually kind of think about what I'm saying these days, or at least get back to work.
You're fine.
Well, because you're lucky to be put in those, those rooms and people want those things. And so you're happy to talk. Sure. And I do get really, excited to talk about certain things. It's fun. But I feel like after a while, you're going on record with stuff that you're not even analyzing after a while. You're like, do I believe what I just said? It sounded good, but like, yeah.
That has happened over the years where I'll quote something back to a guest and they'll say, I said that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yes,
I know. Well, it's nice even to be there though. I like that beat where it's like someone says something to you and you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm on board with that. Maybe I was in 2011 or whatever, but like, I think by now or whatever it is, or even to be like, I was in a mood, that day probably. And like, yeah, I like the ability to revisit that and to actually state, in that practice that we can have these moods. We can actually say something one day and then the next day you're like, I probably shouldn't have put it that way. That's important to establish that we're not all out there making, granite carved statements that like, we're mercurial, we're weird, we're in our garages and we're in moods. And like, you're out there defending work that you were in a mood about 2 years ago. And then the book comes out and you're like, right, I don't remember why I did that. I was in a mood.
I was thinking about my mortality, so I decided to illustrate a girl running through the woods, discovering a skeleton. Yeah. Speaking of kids, in 7th grade, you met a kid named Donald. He said you could call him Don, which sort of led you to refer to yourself as John. Although Jonathan Klassen does sound pretty good, I have to say.
I'm a little sad.
Have you kept in touch with Don?
No, Don vanished as soon as I went into high school. My setup in elementary school in 7th grade was that we had just moved to Niagara Falls, Ontario from a suburb of Toronto, Ontario.
I've heard of it.
And I was in French immersion school in Toronto, Ontario. And when we went to Niagara Falls, the school I went to, they didn't have immersion like that there. They had straight up French kids. And they were bussed in from a town just next to Niagara Falls called Welland, where there's a big French-speaking community out there. And so for whatever reason, this school was in Niagara Falls, and it was very, very small. There were 14 kids in my class, and it was a 7-8 split, so it was tiny. But as soon as everybody from that school went to high school, they went back to Welland to go to French high school. And I lived half a block in Niagara Falls from an English-speaking high school that was pretty hard to make an excuse not to go to. And so all of my people that I did get to know, Don included, went over there. So Don was like this little guardian angel for like a year. 7th grade is a rough year to move, especially from the gentle.
I moved in 6th grade.
It's tough, right? It was, tough. Yep. I think it was formatively tough.
Yep.
This was even like a lateral social move. It was like from a very gentle, I found that immersion schools are gentler somehow. Even on school visits, I found this. I'm not sure if it's because of the, the language reset that everyone has to sort of socially deal with, that it kind of neutralizes a lot of like cliques and stuff, or I don't know. But we were all, like, in retrospect, we were all really gentle in that school. And then I went to Niagara Falls in this little tiny school, and it was rough. It was a tough crowd. And so I was thrown down pretty hard just socially by that. And so I was sad. I'd left all my friends, and here's this guy, day 4, day 5. I'm just kicking rocks out in the schoolyard at recess, not knowing what the heck to do with myself. And Don comes up, Donald, as he was known to me then through the roll call. And Donald has a shaved head and 5 spikes of hair where his bangs are sticking out. And he's got an Aerosmith Get a Grip t-shirt, which is what he wore every day.
Perfect.
I think it had just come out and I hadn't heard it yet. And I was like, what is this album? But anyway, Don comes up and he's like, you're Jon. And I was like, yeah. And I'm just like deeply grieving this whole move. And he's like, I'm Donald. And I'm like, Donald, you're the scariest man I've ever seen in my life. And he's like, call me Don. Everyone calls me Don. And it was like the first time, like no one had even spoken to me yet. And there were only 14 kids in the class. It's not like you got lost in the crowd.
Right.
So it was pretty conspicuous. He's like, call me Don, come on over, come smoke cigarettes with us or whatever they were doing. But it was the warmest gesture relatively that I'd ever had.
Yeah.
I made a point of being like, not that I'm Donald on the schoolyard. I don't have that presence and I'm not representative of anything intimidating. But for whatever I could give out to people, whatever tone that set, I just remember it being shocking almost that he had done that.
Right.
And so from there on out, I don't say Jonathan, call me Jon, but it looks abbreviated because there's no H. It's just Jon. And so I feel like inherently in the spelling, there's an implied abbreviation that it's just, I think my wearing hats is meant to be the same thing almost. I started wearing hats that year every day because I think that there's a certain informality that I'm looking to establish before we even start. There's a signal being sent for whatever, capacity you have to send it and for whatever use it is. Sure. That you're like, look, this isn't a big deal. Like, call me Don.
That's the title of this episode. Call me Don.
Call me Don.
Just kidding. Well, in honor of this conversation, I am wearing a hat.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Backwards baseball cap.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's my awful Baltimore Orioles. Terrible. Just god-awful team. I've been a fan of that team since I was a kid, and I hate every minute of it. But I'm not going to stop.
No, that's not how that works. That's not how team sports work, right? You have to go with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I know.
Go Canada World Cup.
I know.
They're doing all right, right?
I know. They're not. Yeah, it's going okay. Knock on all sorts of desks and surfaces around here. But yeah,
I gotcha. Yeah. I gotcha. Yeah, USA is playing tonight as of this recording, so we'll see how that goes. I just want to see U.S. versus Canada. I don't know if that's going to happen.
I mean,
I don't have the brackets in front of me, so I don't know if that would even happen.
I know we got it in the World Series. Speaking of baseball, right? That was a nice little USA versus Toronto. Canada. Yeah, LA, Toronto. And I live in LA, and I'm from Toronto, and I've got a very old Blue Jays hat that has a lot of visible miles on it, and so that wasn't a controversial hat around here until that series, and then it had all sorts of feelings attached to it. But that was as close as we're going to get. Are you still a Blue Jays fan? Yeah, lightly. I'm a Blue Jays fan, especially like I can tell you everything about the 92, 93, 94 teams. And then
Joe Carter.
Right. Till death, Joe Carter, all that stuff. Like I know, like I was one of those kids. My room was plastered and every guy, every stat, all those things. But it was such a rich time and it was so much fun to be in Toronto in those years. And the city felt great. And those series were so exciting. And that team, especially Carter actually, was just like such a great beacon of light. Yeah. It just felt awesome. And I feel like now I have the hat and the stickers and stuff on my luggage just as like a bow to that era. And I have no idea how to talk about, like I can talk about last year's team and stuff, but I'm not a trivia baseball guy. And so I have a hard time on like airplanes when the guy sits next to me and he's like, so the Jays, right? How about that bench? And you're like, oh crap. Like, right. Yes, the bench.
It's made out of wood, I think.
Yeah, but it's very emotional. Like I think I wear it as, just a tribute to that time. Same as the books, really. It's sort of just like a wave at those years.
Speaking of books, a few years go by. Don is goodness knows where. You make your way over to Sheridan College and you do study animation, not children's books. But did you have an eye on being a children's book creator back then?
No. No, I did not. It was really strange because when it finally happened, when I finally realized that I did want to do books, which was in the middle of doing my first book, or illustrating one anyway.
Cat's Night Out?
Cat's Night Out, yeah. That one I was like, oh, like all of these really obvious pointing signs came back at me. There was a day in Sheridan, we had a very, very old film history teacher named Kai Pindle. He was a National Film Board of Canada animator. He had done a lot of independent stuff, and they had just, they had him for a couple more years, and he would bring in these old film reels, these 35 millimeter reels of old animation stuff. And his class was just him showing us his collection. That was it. He would talk a little bit, but mostly he would just show us stuff. He had a day where he showed us UPA cartoons.
Oh my gosh.
And I'd never seen this stuff before. If you're unfamiliar, go back and look at the UPA stuff from the 50s and 60s, mainly the ones directed by a guy named Jon Hubbell, but like all sorts of stuff. And the UPA was this like small, weirdly independent, but like super intelligent group of animators working in LA, actually, mostly, I think. And just stylistically forward, like way forward, just like the smartest, funnest stuff. And they were making these shorts and they were making adaptations. But some of the stuff he showed us, and I'd never seen animation look like this. It is what it turned out, when it was watered down, turned into Hanna-Barbera and turned into all the Saturday morning stuff. But this was them cracking animation for like jazz art and like minimalist stuff and experimental design. Yeah. Also, they were adapting children's stories. One of the ones we saw that day was a Madeline adaptation, completely faithful to the artwork and moving in a way I'd never seen animation move. It was respecting the vignetting. It was respecting the weird loose drawing style. It was perfect. And they also did Gerald McBoing Boing, which was a Dr. Seuss story. It was designed like one of his books. It didn't look like a Dr. Seuss drawing. It looked like something else. But the pacing and the storytelling, it changed my life that day. I walked out of there and there were 3 or 4 of us who'd never seen anything like that. And we just sat down at our desks after that class and we're like, what are we going to do? Like, what do we do now that we've seen this? And all of the ones I'd responded to so hard had looked like children's books. And I had grown up with that era of children's books, weirdly, because the only children's books I had were my dad's that he had kept when he was a kid. They were all the Peet Eastman. They were all of the Roy McKie, all of the Madeline stuff, like that whole era. I didn't feel like I was throwing back or anything. It just felt like that was what children's books looked like to me. And I responded so strongly to see that stuff again. I hadn't seen it since I was a kid. I hadn't kept those books around. I didn't look at them in high school or certainly not in college. And I just had this like huge arrow day being like children's books. And I was like, how do I apply that to animation? And just kept walking down that path. And so, that happened a couple of times where I went to work at the studios and I was
DreamWorks, Leica.
DreamWorks and Leica. And I started making work in the evenings by myself that looked nothing like the work I was doing. But I started adding type and text to it a lot, titles and captions, and I would like to hand letter them and all this stuff. And I was really enjoying that side of the work, but still somehow not putting together that maybe this was pointing to an interest in bookwork. I was just like, I like putting captions under drawings, maybe for animation reasons. And it was so stupid. And then finally, I heard from publishers who had seen that work. Cat's Night Out was with Simon & Schuster. And I heard from...
was Lucy the art director?
Lucy Cummins wrote me saying that she'd seen my student film from Sheridan on YouTube, early YouTube days. And she was like, I saw this film. Wow. Like, do you want to try? And first she wrote asking if I wanted to try and make a book out of that film. She was like, I can't promise, that this will happen, but I'd love to see you try. I love this work. And I'd never heard from a publisher before that. But to the point, I didn't know about children's books. I hadn't looked at them in ages. And all I remembered, I was like, what's the first children's book I can think of that I remember from when I was a kid? And it was Sam and the Firefly by Peet Eastman. And so I went to Powell's in Portland.
UPA.
Yeah, exactly. He was a UPA guy too.
He was fired from the UPA after a House Un-American Activities Committee asked him to name names.
Did he name names? Did Peet Eastman name names?
No.
Oh, he didn't.
He told him to go kick cans.
Yeah.
And UPA fired him after that. So he was in between jobs. And then speaking of Dr. Seuss,
right.
His old army captain,
that's right,
Theodore Geisel, was like, hey man, you want to You want to work for me?
It is so crazy that all those guys were just like army buddies. It was the same as the Disney guys were the same way. All the Disney animators were just like in armies together and stuff. And they got back and they were like, let's make Pinocchio. And like, you're just like, holy crap.
I know, it's nuts.
Robin Hood, the Disney Robin Hood, I always felt like when you watch it, it's so talky. It's just these guys lying around in fields and in branches and in battlements talking to each other for long stretches of time. They're on guard. There are these guards on the tower, or there's these just guys hiding out in the woods. Right. And they're just talking. And it's like, this is an army movie. This is about being in the army. This speed of like conversation and this like kind of life these days feel like they're all in like little companies together. And like, it was just that tone that these guys had of talking to each other in places that they had sort of been hired to, or like told to go stand in. And like, that's what those movies feel like. Even though that's not the story, they're wrapping that tone around, like, you know, the story of Robin Hood or whatever. So many of their anecdotes. I remember Frank Thomas, who animated Baloo the Bear, had this bit where he was like, I was in the army with this guy who would scratch his chest a lot whenever he talked. And so that's Baloo. He scratches his chest when he talks. And it's just like these few years where these guys were just like in the most intense time of their lives. Like they just recorded all this stuff and it just goes into these movies. Yeah. And like all the characters that they would come up with, all the mannerisms, they were just guys they were in the army with. Yeah. It's so wild. Anyway, we're getting way off track.
No, we're not. We're talking about basically the sort of pipeline that remains to this day between animation and children's books. I mean, you know, the list of animators turned illustrators is a very long and distinguished one, like Gustaf Tenggren, P. Miller, P.D. Eastman, Aurelius Battaglia, Mary Blair, obviously, Bill Peet, Retta Scott, and then somebody by the name of Jon Klassen. You know, there's just so many folks who come from that world into the children's book world. Sometimes they have one foot in both at the same time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they transition entirely. So what was like that one? Was it just simply Cat's Night Out did well and you're like, okay, this is it, my full-time thing? No, or, it wasn't. When did you transition from animation to children's books?
No, it sounds kind of pompous to say so, but like in the middle of making Cat's Night Out, which I knew, you know, there was I didn't have any, no one knew who, you know, that name wasn't worth anything. It was going to be a small book. But halfway through making it, I think even probably in the first few spreads of the assignment, I was like, oh no, I've followed the wrong road. This is it. Right. Working for feature animation, you're asked to show everything, either in story or design or whatever. There's the budget and the attitude to be maximalist, right? To show giant explosions and huge plot events. And like, you know, it's supposed to do that, or they want to anyway. And every time I would get any sort of control or have any suggestion, it was to minimize that and to allude and to suggest. And it's just not what feature animation does as an industry or even as a form, really. And so I'd been just begging against this and not really understanding why I was suddenly so unsuited to this area, because I'd been wanting it since I was 10, I thought. I'd been watching the Disney, you know, making of things, and I was like, that's my job. I know that's my job. And here I had it, and I was like, this isn't quite my job. And then I sat...
Were you an in-betweener?
No, I was a terrible animator, it turned out. I really hated actually animating. I went into story at first. I was a storyboard intern at DreamWorks, and then slowly got into actual story a little bit. But halfway through my tenure at DreamWorks, the first shot, I was there twice. And the first bit, I got a call from Leica that was just putting itself together. It was early days, and it was Henry Selick and Mike Cachuela, who was the head of story on Coraline, called me like at my office. I was at DreamWorks and my phone rang, which my phone never rang. I was like, who knows my number? And I picked it up, and it was Henry and Mike. And they were like, you gotta come up here and see what we're up to. And I had heard vaguely that Wes Anderson had been looking at Leica to make Fantastic Mr. Fox after Coraline, because he'd worked with Henry on Life Aquatic. And so this was in the works somehow. And as much as I was excited about whatever Henry was going to do, I was also excited to get on the ground floor of whatever Fantastic Mr. Fox was going to be. And so this whole place just sounded so exciting. I'd never been to Portland, but I was like, I'll I can sneak away for a weekend and come and see you guys. And I did. And they wanted me on design instead of on story, which they had seen like 2 or 3 drawings from our like college website. But I like drawing rooms and staircases and hallways and, you know, old character doorways and stuff like that. I just really love that stuff. And so they found that, and they thought I'd be suited to an old Victorian place, I guess.
Wow.
But it was like Dan Krall was there already, who I already idolized from like Samurai Jack and all that stuff. Oh. And a couple other guys were there, all from that they'd hired a lot of that team.
I tried to hire Dan several times to do something for me when I was at Simon & Schuster and Penguin, and I was never able to line up those stars.
For anyone listening, Dan Krall is the most unsung, talented like man you've ever that has ever. He's working in books, and like he's just like
seconded.
He's so good, but he's also like so stylistically suited to his thing. Like I remember on Coraline, his ideas, we adopted almost all of them, but they were done. He was in the back with a nib pen and a light table, and everybody else was on like Cintiqs and like Scratch, like tablets and stuff. Yeah. And Dan's back there with ink everywhere, making these incredible, but like he was so stylistically involved, but then he was like, no, what I'm proud of here is this idea. Look what this design idea is, or for this set or whatever it was. And they were, sure. And Henry recognized, but anyway, I go up there and I was like, yes, I want to do this. And so that my thing at DreamWorks ramped down, and I jumped over to Leica for the better part of 3 years. I was on, maybe even more. I was on Coraline doing sets and props and graphics and posters, and just it turned like it was such a weird small team that we all ended up just being everything to everyone for those years. And then after that, went back down to DreamWorks after that movie was over. That contract was only 2.5 years. And at the end of that, I'd worked up a book agent, and I'd had 2 books out, I think, or 2 books finished. And I was like, I got to try this. I got to try, I had gotten married, but we had like an $800 a month apartment. I could try it for a year and see if it worked or whatever. And then when it didn't, the way I thought of it, when it didn't work or when it petered out, I'd go back to the studios. And in that year I want my hat back, and I did not go back to the studio.
No. Did it do well off the bat? And if so, were you surprised by how well it was received?
It's a good question. I think that it took a minute. I remember doing a lot. I remember doing a lot of ground game stuff for it, like being pretty quickly thrust into the festival circuit and like the conference circuit with it. They did a really great job. There was a lady named Sharon at Candlewick, who was like a really veteran school and library lady who, in retrospect, just like I think I owe a lot to. And she would sit at me with tables.
Sorry, who?
Sharon, and I'm her last name is gone, and I feel terrible because she's the greatest.
We'll just Google it. Yeah. Sharon from Candlewick.
Sharon from Candlewick. She's long retired now, but that's why her name is floating away. But she would bring me to these things, and we would do like speed dating tables with the book, and we would have like 3 or 4 minutes per table, and then the bell would go, and you have to move on to the next table. And I didn't know how to pitch this thing. It was printed, and I'd never sat with my book I'd never toured at all. And so all I did was read the book, and the reaction was deeply mixed at all of these things, where like half the people were like delighted, and half of them were like horrified and really mad at me. But I didn't have time to like dig down on either of those reactions. We just went to the next table. Yeah. This was before social media or before any of that stuff. So you didn't get, I was only hearing what the publisher was reporting, and that's a pretty slow moving mechanism, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
But I think pretty quickly it began to be more visible in the shops. And I think like it was, I think it did pretty well. It wasn't the print. I don't know if the first run was big. I can't remember that. I don't know how optimistic Candlewick was about it, but I think they reacted or saw that they ought to react pretty quickly. And then it stayed up there for quite a while.
Sure did. And then 2 years later, you're a Caldecott medalist with This Is Not My Hat. Actually, that year, I don't know if I've ever I don't think I have interviewed someone who won a Caldecott medal and an honor in the same year. And that's 2013 for This Is Not My Hat and Extra Yarn.
Right.
So the question is, what were you doing when you got the Caldecott call for both things? Did they tell you at the same time? I would assume so, instead of 2 phone calls. And perhaps more importantly, how well did you sleep later that night?
There were 2 phone calls. There wasn't
really?
one. Yes.
Wow.
I was. Okay. We were in that apartment still. I was working as a production designer for a very short film experiment that Google was making. They had rallied a bunch of Pixar guys up in San Jose. This is very convoluted, but they had recently bought Motorola to make Google phones. And part of their pitch was that they were going to make short animated films where the phone accelerometer, meaning the thing that knows the phone is moving space was going to be the active camera inside these animated films. So you'd be standing in 3D space on the screen, moving your phone, and the technology, what we were figuring out, as much as we were figuring out anything stylistic or story-wise, we were also figuring out, how does one even technically do this? How do you make sure the audience can see what you need them to see if they can look anywhere inside 3D? It was really interesting, actually. I remember just loving these talks. I liked those kinds of talks more than stylistic talks, because I didn't worry about, making it look good. But it was like, how do you manipulate an audience the way you need to when they feel absolutely free? It was a film called A Windy Day, and it was directed by a director named Jan Pinkava. His claim to fame, for me anyway, was he had directed and written Jerry's Game, which is a short that Pixar had made about an old man playing chess against himself, which is amazing. Mm-hmm. It's really good. Mm-hmm. And I was such a big fan of that short. And Jan, it turned out, was this massively intellectual guy. Anyway, what the rhythm of that job was that I would fly up to San Jose every fourth day or something and spend a couple days in a hotel while we banged out this thing. And then I'd fly home and see my wife, and we would hang out for a bit, and then I would go back. And so that morning I was due to catch like a 7 a.m. flight to San Jose. I think because of that setup, I was going to wake up really, really early. I had slept on the couch to try and be like courteous to Moran, my wife, so that I wouldn't wake her up leaving. And I got the call on a couch, I think. And they called crack of dawn because I'm West Coast time. Sure. I thought it was the cab. I was still calling. This is such a long time ago, but I would have to arrange for cabs, and they would call if you were late. They would call from down at the street. And so the phone rang, and I was like, oh, crap, I missed my alarm, and that's the cab downstairs. And so I answered really hurriedly, I think, being like, hi, like that kind of thing. And it was this entire committee telling me this thing that I had like not at all. Like, this wasn't in the wind. This wasn't one of those things where you're like kind of sadly sitting by the phone because you'd heard enough blog posts or something, like maybe. Right. It wasn't that. Like, this wasn't coming, not at all. And then they told me, and I think I was shocked. And then it was like, it wasn't even, I think the way that they said it was like, it wasn't only that you'd gotten a Caldecott, you'd gotten the medal, you got the gold for this book. They laughed, and I was aghast and yelling, I think. And then they hung up, and then they called again. And I thought that time was the cab. And then they were like, we're also calling to tell you that you got an honor for extra yarn. And I think then I got kind of mad. And I was like, you guys, like, I was like kind of upset. Like, it was too much. It was already too much. Even in the first 20 seconds, it just felt like way too much for my brain. And I remember I hung up the phone, and I woke Moran up on the way out the door, which I wasn't planning on doing, but I woke her up, and I was like, I got to go. The cab's downstairs. We won 2 Caldecotts. I'll call you later. And I got in the cab, and then I had a cab ride and a plane ride to San Jose to sit and look out the window and go over the phone calls and to understand what had just happened. And I remember, especially the plane ride, the 40-minute plane ride between LA and San Jose, being like racked with like remorse and guilt because my call hadn't been probably what the committee maybe had been hoping for, right? All that time of going over those things, I had been sleepy and, just like I hadn't said anything pretty or smart or like, anything.
You were in the middle of brushing your teeth on the second call, like, what? Sure, yeah.
Truly, yeah. I had a bag over my shoulder, and I was like, I thought you were the cab again. And like, I just felt terrible. Oh. I got off the plane and turned my phone back on, and it was just it was only email and text back then, but I think it had already been like what they did. I'm not sure how it goes. I forget, but like they call early in the morning because they're going to announce it at a press conference like later that morning. And that conference happened while I was on the plane. And so by the time I got off the plane, everyone had found out, and I was getting all this insane stuff. And I was going to work that day. I was at the Google office, like intensely running this table of design people. But also like I had to tell the main producer boss, like, look, this thing just happened. I might be on the phone a little bit today. And animation people aren't quite as, versed in what publishing is all about. And so they had a vague sense of what this was, but not really. And so did I, to be honest. Like, I was learning as I went the true scale of this, like what happens to you. And especially, I guess maybe then what happens to you, like just reaction wise, what you're reacting to, the energy you're receiving, especially because there were 2. It was a crazy story. Yeah. And so very quickly I got out of that day of work and was just spending my day on the phone, and it was insane. It was insane.
This podcast is produced by the Illustration Department, a global leader in online education for illustrators. Visit illustrationdept.com for offerings like mentorships and portfolio reviews, testimonials, our alumni showcase, our best-selling Substack, and more. That's illustrationdept.com. And now, back to our conversation. Have you ever been told by anybody that you have a distinct artistic identity or quote-unquote style?
I think it's been told to me in a kind of a sideways way more often, where it's like in his usual way is like the reviews or like, the thing you read.
Yeah.
It's like, he's back with his thing that he does, not in a derogatory way or in like a bad way,
No.
But it's like the implication of the language is that like there's something of an old faithful.
A Klassen when you see one.
Kind of, yeah. Where you draw something and they're like, of course you did it that way. It's like, of course, like I thought I would try to turn left there or something. And that's every book almost.
That's my question. Does it bother you?
No, because if I felt myself doing it, if I felt myself reverting or like going back to a recipe, then I'd be bummed. Mm-hmm. But because I'm trying actually pretty hard every time to run off from the last thing, then it's almost a nice surprise to find out that you are only so broad in your capabilities. I think it probably points to some sort of personality in the work. And it's weird to find out when you didn't know about it.
Right.
But it's none of my business even almost. You know what I mean? Like if I'm drawing what I want to draw, then however it's, grouped together or however those threads seem to tie together from book to book or project to project or form to form even, those commonalities and those things, it's the furthest thing from what I think I'm in the business of analyzing. Hopefully.
Exactly. I'm glad you said that, John. I tell that to illustrators all the time. The market, quote unquote, the market, which is a whole other conversation and debate. And I think the market's a mirage. It's nebulous. It's hard to define. So why try? I tell illustrators, yeah, sure. Know what's going on these days in publishing. Look at books that have been published in recent years and just kind of get your finger on the pulse of it. At the very same time, none of it is your business.
Oh,
Your
yeah.
focus should be on the work that you do.
In terms of, not on the trends,
not
certainly.
letting it define you.
No. And even in the analysis of what you yourself are doing, I think that there's a distinction to be made there, though, where I keep a very sharp eye on where I'm unhappy in a project. So even inside a drawing, even inside, like, if there's a drawing to be done and I'm looking forward to a certain stage of it or a certain corner of it, I keep track of that. And I keep track of there's something that, man, I don't want to do that part. Maybe I can get away with leaving that out. I keep track of that. And so the next time I go in, or even inside that particular project, to be like, if I can excise it, if I can remove it from my day, or the thing that I was super into, can I make a whole book out of that moment? Can I do that just next time? Can I only eat ice cream next time? Keeping track of that, it's different than keeping track of your style. The result is your style or whatever it is, your look. But I think that just making yourself as happy as possible in the work, or at the very least, making yourself as unhappy as few times as possible, is really important. And so it's not that you're not analyzing the work as it goes, but you're not looking at stylistic flourishes necessarily, or like analyzing what's going well stylistically. You're just like, it's a very simple thermometer of like, I'm sad at this part. I'm bummed and I don't like it. And you're just being kind of a 4-year-old being like, I don't wanna. What if I don't wanna? Do I have to? And like those things, where you end up in a few years is like all you're doing hopefully is like the parts you wanted to. And that can even change over the course of those years. You as an artist or as a person have changed what it is you feel like doing and what makes you happy. And so it's not like you end up at this dead end of style. You hopefully get different as it goes. And those thermometers go up and down at different moments. And so you follow it.
Everything about you changes. Your taste in food, your taste in clothing, who you are, what you think, and also the way you draw and paint.
Yeah. So I think it's probably hard for someone who's newer at it to tell them not to analyze anything as they're going and don't worry about your style, because they're like, well, then what am I thinking about as I'm working? But you are keeping track of that. Well, I think it's for me anyway, it's the other thing being like, what do you not want to do? Just very simply, don't worry about why. Don't worry about like the reasons and what it points to in terms of who you are. It's almost like the way I sometimes put it is that like, it's sort of like walking down the street. Like, you have a way of walking, and it's not like you're thinking about it while you're walking. You're just getting from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. And like, I have a really, it turns out, kind of a weird way of walking, actually. And I don't think about it, but I have like a weird little hop. I think it comes, I don't remember why, but everyone's like,
look, you're Canadian.
Maybe. My son has it though. And when he started to walk, and like, as he got older, my wife was like, look at that. He has your little hop. And I was like, he just walks. And like, no, he walks like you. And like, that's the same thing as when someone tells you, you used your usual palette, or that you in your standard way of telling a story, you're like, I just walked from point A to point B as best I could. And everyone else has got this like eye on you that you just don't have on yourself. Maybe if you're in pain, if there's like something wrong with your heel and you're like, well, now I got to account for that. Like, that's what I'm talking about, is that like, if you're in pain at a certain point, then whatever that limp is even is going to be your style. It's all of these corrections and like ways of getting from point A to point B with the least amount of pain as possible is the style.
Agreed on all fronts. Illustrators that I work with, and I was going to say illustrators in general, but I don't know every illustrator. So I'm just going to say illustrators that I work with, that I mentor, are often told to, quote, get out of their comfort zone. The reason they're told this by publishing professionals, mostly at portfolio reviews or, whatever, rejection letters, is to improve, to quote unquote find their style. And of course, I disagree with that. I say, and I've written about this on Substack, that it's better to stay in your comfort zone, which is exactly what you're saying, and find ways to expand it.
Yeah.
It's dangerous because people interpret it as in, I don't really like using this medium or this technique or exploring this subject matter or drawing this type of thing, but I guess I have to. If it works for you, fine, go for it. But I am of the belief that in order for any illustrator to move forward productively and significantly with whatever it is that they're doing, it starts with comfort. Yeah.
And that your comfort zone is actually pretty unique looking. The contours of
there it is.
The shape of the shape of that cave and the nuances of it, and like how you decorate it, all that stuff. Where you're happiest. And learning what makes you happy. If you're beginning to build that comfort zone, you're like, oh, actually, my neck feels weird when I sleep in this corner of my comfort zone. So let's make a pillow over there. Let's change that angle. That's the work. And it changes too. How you're comfortable changes.
Yeah.
Listen to your fears, actually. If you're afraid of something or something threatens you or is off-putting to you, excise it. Make the work. For me anyway, the work is the result of me absolutely rejecting those things. And what's left? What is the world that's left when you say, I don't need to actually, internalize that thing I don't like about the world. I'm going to remove it.
Right.
And then what's left is your comfort zone. It's not perfect, but it's a statement on the things that you're angry about as much as a statement by negative space. It's a statement on those things as much as it is the positive stuff. And the other reason is, I think children, but audiences generally, can feel through the work when you are excited about the work. Whether or not it's a perfect piece of work, whether or not it's got problems, or you couldn't draw the thing the best that you may have been wanting to, or the story's a bumpy moment, or whatever it is, if you are turned on in that project and excited for what's going on, and you feel like you've broken through into something and you're happiest, that's the only common denominator in books I've seen that kids especially respond to, because they're stylistically all over the place, right? Kids aren't looking for a look or a style.
Nope.
Their pile of favorite books looks pretty varied for the most part. But all of them, whether I like those books or not, if I'm in that pile and there's 2 or 3 other books that I don't especially like, all of them, the person who made them, you can kind of tell somehow it comes across through the pages that person was like, oh, I'm on one with this one. I think I got something. And that's your whole job, is to just keep that thermometer going, and it comes across. It's almost like what's the word? It's a good business decision to keep yourself happy that way, because the product is going to be better. And so if you're unhappy, if you're busting through your fears and you're just full of cuts and lacerations from that process, maybe some people get good work out of that. I mean, I don't know. I never have. Why would you want to do that? It's going to look like you were in pain the whole book. Yeah. And like, I don't know, even if the book comes out clever or something, that pain comes across. It sounds so hokey and hippie-ish, but I believe it now. I think you put it in the work. You put it in the lines. You put it in the everything.
Shapes and colors.
All of it.
Let's talk a little more literal about this, because it sounds beautiful. But let's talk a little bit literal about this. Like, this might be a little too literal an interpretation of what we're talking about, or maybe too pedestrian an example or something, but I don't do video for the podcast for that very reason. I don't want to learn about cameras. I don't want to do a green screen thing, and I don't want to learn anything about doing any video production. I just don't want to do it.
Right.
And so therefore I decided pretty easily, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
This podcast is going to be audio only, YouTube, schmootube.
Yeah. And it's not that you're saying that, cameras are not interesting objectively speaking or something. It's just not what you're excited about. You don't owe yourself the larger explanation about why. You just know you're sad when you start thinking about cameras. And so very simply, you're just like, I don't want to. And like that, again, like it sounds super childish, but you're like, what if I don't want to? And I think that, naturally, I think that people who are getting into it don't feel like they're in a position to say that. If you're new and someone asks you to do something, then they're like, how come, like, I can't tell the art director I don't wanna. And you kind of, it's not that you put it that way. You just try to give them something that feels complete so that they don't even notice you didn't wanna. And that's the work, is like, how do I make this thing feel complete with what it is I want to do? How does it feel still like a full piece of work, a complete thought? I've done as little as possible that makes me cry. So like, it's not that you're not going to feel uncomfortable in certain corners, but like the work is like getting that ratio up so that like the least amount of pain, like I do books still that I'm like, next time, not doing that. And like, you're just always learning. You don't have this list that like, now finally I'm happiest and maximally happy.
Exactly.
But you're trying as you go to make it easy on yourself in a certain way. And so when you give it to them, you've hopefully done the work that they don't even notice it's gone, the thing you didn't want to do.
I'm an illustrator listening to you and me talk, writing notes down furiously. Okay, I'm going to take 2 steps back before you have the conversation with this art director, or before before you're working on a project with an art director where you can do that. You're trying to get the art director's attention. So you go to a conference, you submit your portfolio, you query agents, you send your stuff out, and then you get in return what I very often hear from illustrators: you need to brighten your palette.
Mm-hmm.
And these folks, the folks that I talk to, want to say, I don't wanna.
Yeah.
That is their palette. It's often publishing professionals who say this. The confusing part for me, and I get confused pretty easily, John. So, I'm not the most intelligent human being you've ever talked to. But this is what's confusing to me. If someone like you, or anyone else who works with more complex, deeper, complicated, interesting, subdued, whatever adjective you want to use, palettes, and they're doing quite well, and these folks are saying, "Gosh, I really love that book. I like John's art," and then they turn around and tell an illustrator that I'm working with, "Yeah, your palette's too subdued, too desaturated." Whenever I hear that, I say to the illustrator, does anyone ever tell Jon Klassen to brighten his fucking palette? Pardon my language. That's how I say it. No, I'm kidding. I don't say it like that. I just say, geez, I wonder if John ever gets that comment. So I'm asking you, John, do you ever get that comment? Or have you ever been told to brighten your palette?
I get told.
And have you said to them, I don't want to?
Yeah. Well, I do say I don't want to. It still comes up. I say I don't want to. And even in the early days, I said that with what I never wanted to be is in a discussion where my style or my personality or my preferences was the counterpoint to their note. I always wanted to have, and this was coming from animation, I think, where all day you're arguing your points in a commercial way or a story way. You're not hired necessarily. You're hired to be a cog and a Swiss Army knife in those studios. And that's why I was so surprised to find myself in books, because I always wanted to be invisible in those teams. I was so excited to be like, put me in, give me the style notes. I will vanish into this thing. And I was sad to find out how stubborn I was when I was being asked to do things in those studios. I was like, suddenly I had reactions that were much stronger than I expected to things I didn't want to do. But whenever I would try to rebut or explain why it is I wanted to do something in those studios, they don't care if you have a portfolio somewhere. They're like, why is this good for the film? What are you doing to serve this larger project that there are 300 people and $800 million riding on? Like, what's going on?
Right.
And so you're like, okay, here's why. And maybe just my sensibility too, is that I just don't want to make my own personality the product. I want the thing to hang on its own.
Right.
Well, for I Want My Hat Back, it didn't come up. But I remember thinking that I was really proud of the fact that color does come into that book, but very specifically, it has red, right? Red is a very important color in that book, and a pretty red as far as I'm concerned, but it needs to stand out. Story-wise, if the text doesn't mention the red hat, I need to set it up so that by contrast, the red is noticeable. For the first time, there's an actual kind of a color in the book. There's browns and oranges and things, and as far as I'm concerned, they're colors, but to apparently everyone else, it's pretty subdued. Yeah. Given that stage, then my red hits, and then the audience, however young they might be and however blurry things might still be to them, you've done your best to make sure they see that red hat. That's the only way they're going to find out about it.
Exactly.
And so you can say in a story way, look, if I raise the palette of this book, red is going to wash away with all the other bright colors, and you're not going to notice it. And you need to notice it or this book doesn't work. Yeah. That doesn't get you out of jail completely. If the place has decided that they need bright colors on their list, I don't know if you're going to change the corporate, meeting with your song, right? With the thing you want to do. I think that it's also helped me to conflate, or at least to reprogram, the saturation discussion with talk of contrast and value. I love a hard hitting value. I love value and contrast, right? Like that's the work, is that and so you're saying, I think what's often, if you're saying that you need brighter colors because you need visual impact and because you want to grab your audience's attention, what you're really talking about there is value. The colors are doing their work, but if you bring it down to black and white, they still have to punch value-wise. And I love a value punch. That's my favorite. I don't want anything to wash away from 15, 20 feet away. I want you to be able to see that little guy in the corner. And so I set it up for that. Mm-hmm. That's another sort of counterpoint. You can be like, look, my values are really strong here. And that's what when Mac and I were, we have these books, Triangle, Square, and Circle, and we were pitching a show about them. We wanted to do a show, a little stop motion show. And Triangle, Square, and Circle are black characters. They are geometric forms with white eyes and black pupils and little black legs and sometimes black and white or black arms that come out when they're needed. Yeah. And their worlds are very colorful, but against that, they are black with white eyes. And they were designed that way for a bunch of reasons. They were neutralized. I thought you didn't want to favor any of the characters. And naturally, some colors look more evil or more well-intentioned than others. And so I didn't want to cast like Triangle as green because that's sort of a more villainous color than maybe red. And then what does Circle do? She doesn't really have a color. Like I was out of my depth. And so if I don't have answers to those questions that are clear to me, then I'm like, well, then what we can do so that they can read over this colorful world, which I think it is colorful, at least in some parts, then we know where they are. You're never going to lose them because the only thing on that page is black, and that's your character. Not only that, but it hits, you can read their eye expression from far away, which they were going to be pretty small on the page a lot of times. And if I'm middling my values, that eye expression runs the risk of being unclear. When we were pitching the show around, these TV places or the streaming places don't, by then we were working in books, and we could make arguments to publishers with a certain amount of authority, but not with TV people. They don't care who you are. And so they're like, well, okay, you've got these three people, but like you say Circle's a girl, and you're like, yeah. And they're like, well, shouldn't they be colors? Shouldn't Circle be pink? And shouldn't like colors? Oh. This is kids television. And Mac tells this story a lot where like, I just wouldn't do it. We were in pitches where maybe this was the linchpin of the pitch, where they were like, look, we'll do it if you do this. And my argument was always technical. Like I was like, look, if you do this, the whole visual structure, as far as I'm concerned, falls apart. We need neutrality. And also these guys are like kind of silent film actors, as far as I'm concerned. Like it's just visually, this is their best setup at emoting and reading. Like it's not my style that's dictating this. I mean, I guess it turns into it, but just very simply, technically, this is your best bet at like an iconic still. Like you're never going to lose these guys on the set. And right. I would just sit there with my arms crossed like that because that was what I thought, technically was correct. And Mac, I think, always got a kick out of it because he thought of me as just being stylistically stubborn. And maybe I am, but the style comes out of my arguments. And maybe I do back them into the style a little bit. I just don't want them to look like that. But that sounds sound to me, right? Like it made sense.
Yes.
And so like I try for those. So it's not just me being like, look, I'm the artist here. I feel this. Like come back at me with whatever you want. I just never, ever want to be the talk. Even now, like I get real nervous when I feel like even they haven't had the discussion because they think that I've got some sort of, feeling that's apparently should be respected. I want to have these talks. I want to defend my points on a technical basis because you're exactly right. There's going to be a 3-year-old who's not picking this up because he knows other books or something that I've done. It's going to be why does this work on the table? Why does it work? And so again, those aren't always going to win your argument. If you're new and you're trying to make those technical arguments to an editor about why this is the best decision, the best you can hope for, and the best that I ended up having, was a publisher who actually understands and who likes the work. And then the first example that we had that I did, well, that's not necessarily true. I did a couple other books before I Want My Hat Back. But from there on out, I had something, commercial to point to. And what I hope at the very least is that those books, if they are saturation or if they are, chromatically subdued, that at least it serves of what you're talking about, something of a comp for whatever it's useful. And when that argument comes up, if they don't have a technical reason why those colors should be pushed down, they at least have a book that did okay, that they can point to and be like, well, it worked over there. And maybe that's fuel for fire. Sure. But I don't know. It's a hard argument. It's in those early days, I don't envy it. I don't miss it, having to defend that stuff over and over again.
I tell illustrators the hierarchy of what's most important with an illustration starts with design, obviously. What are your shapes? What's your composition? Your line quality, the nature with which you apply color, design, the overall design of it. How does it look is number one, obviously. Number two is value.
Yeah.
If you don't have your values right, if you haven't blocked them in, organized them, structured them in a way that helps us see what we need to see, then 3, color will not help you. It doesn't matter. If your design is strong and your values are strong, your colors can almost be anything you want them to be.
Yeah.
Almost.
And your eyes hopefully get excited by that, arrangement. One of the things that really excited me about coming from animation to books was that they hold still, and that your guy, whatever your focal point is, whether it's a character or a doorway or whatever it is, can be millimeters from the thing that would value-wise obscure it or make it lost.
Yeah.
But you can take care of him or her or it or whatever it is on the page that you need to be framing. And the tension there's there's a pleasure in framing it just so that your audience can see it. And that's the tension of the picture. And and I couldn't believe it, because in animation, you're no, it's going to move all over the place. You have to plan for these moments or these points, and everything has to read all the time from every camera angle. It's really hard. I love it, but it's really hard. But the luxury in books of it being he's never going to move from that spot. I can set up my whole page in the excitement of the fact that he's never going to move. Yeah. It's great.
A fun little exercise that folks can do is look at any art. It doesn't have to be illustration. It can be Caravaggio. It can be Renoir. It can be whoever you are into, modern or past. If you're in a museum, take your camera, take photos of it, convert your photos to grayscale, and just study how, Sargent used value, how Picasso used value. Just look at your favorite artists, turn their work into grayscale, and study how they played with their values. That will help you expand what your understanding of value is. It's very simple. It's a very simple game, and it's fun. And you could do it online. You can just bring it onto your Photoshop, convert to grayscale. It's not hard to learn about this stuff.
I think I got lucky in a backwards kind of way with this stuff because, as I said, I went to school for animation, which was then paper flipping. It was the old, pegs of paper and pencil, and you're flipping paper over a light table. And it was just hours and hours and hours of rigorous drawing. And when we weren't doing that at the light table, we were life drawing with charcoal and fast poses, minutes, 30-second poses with just charcoal on a giant piece of newsprint. Yeah, and so I never in those 3-4 years at school trained with what color could be used for or do. I just wasn't trained that way. It wasn't part of my thing. And so whether or not I was organically interested or not, those 3 years or 4 years just strangled whatever color interest I had that was left. And so suddenly I was out doing books with no color training. Or even before that, I remember getting to Coraline actually and sitting next to Chris Applehans, who at the time was already kind of known for his crazy concept art portfolio just around town, but has since been moved on to co-direct K-pop Demon Hunters and insane stuff. But at the time we were sitting next to each other at these things. And Chris had the opposite training. Chris had gone to Art Center in Pasadena and learned how to, I remember doing a kitchen set for Coraline, and I wanted copper pots in the kitchen set. And so I drew them And I was painting very quickly with my colors for these set designs because I knew that they were going to paint them on set. And so I was sort of more in the business of designing the physical thing. But I still needed to elude the fact that it was copper. I wanted them to be copper. And so I did this, and Chris was sitting next to me. He looks over and he's like, oh. And I was like, what? And he's like, well, light doesn't hit copper that way. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, watch. And he comes over and like quickly, I don't even think he touched my screen. I think he did something on his keyboard that did it somehow. And it was suddenly the whole thing was alive and it was perfect. And he had he'd squinted while he did it even.
Yep.
And he used to show me how you could use like bits of reflective color inside a color and you would drag your color finder over it, your like little, eyedropper to see. I couldn't tell what color he'd used even because it was all so beautifully mixed that like I would go over it and I couldn't believe the square that it was telling me my thing was over because it didn't look like that. He had mixed it so well that in context, it was fascinating. And he was trained this way and it was exciting. And it showed me the validity of when you do have something to say with color. That's the way of putting it, is that if you think you have something to say with color, then that's your tool. We're not saying that you shouldn't have to use it or that it should be even subservient to value necessarily. Whatever your language is, and Chris has something to say with color. It's an instrument he plays and a language he knows.
Yeah.
And so there is ways of using those things properly. I think that because it just wasn't part of my training and I've never really known, besides the very basics of cool and warm, like what colors meant to kind of do complementary way. I just don't, it's not a language I speak. And so I find ways around it and you make your arguments very stubbornly in case someone calls you out on it. But it's just not, I don't have that tool. And so I just wanted to counterbalance that by saying like, look, if color is your deal, go off and like, don't have to take this biblically that, it's not important or that it should even sit back from value because there is you could have an idea that's actually all about how the values are muddy. And maybe that's the point visually of your book. And that's a cool thing too. Like there's endless variations of this, but yeah, that was an experience. That was very humbling to be like, oh crap, you can do cool stuff with color. This isn't just some, soapbox that is going to stand for very long.
Speaking of complex color palettes, you're certainly a student of children's book history. You've written about it on Substack, talk about it in interviews. You point to folks like William Steig and Arnold Lobel. Is it Steig or Steig?
I say the exact same thing every time I say his name. I think it's Steig too, but I'm up to be corrected every time I say his name. Yeah.
No, I always thought it was Steig, and then I listened to an interview once, and I think that someone interviewing you mentioned Steig, and neither of you said anything. You just said he said Steig, and you kept talking, and I was like, I probably said
Steig for the next half hour or two. No, I'm lucky if someone says it first, and then I know what, at least in that interview, how you say it.
I'm pretty sure it's Steig.
Yeah.
Anyway, so him, Arnold Lobel, others, as you've referred to them as inspirations. What about picture books of the past do you wish you saw more of these days?
I just finished, and I guess it's announced now because it was over at the festivals and stuff. I've written a book that I'm not illustrating for the first time. It's being illustrated by Jess Hannigan, and for the writing of it, it's a whole other discussion and all that stuff. But for the writing of it and the spirit of the book, and I think this came out of my having been working in board books for a little bit. But I remember specifically for the book, this one with Jess, the tonal comp I had in my head was Sid Hoff, was Danny and the Dinosaur, and these beautiful, that one in particular, but also the other stuff I'd seen of his. I couldn't quite tell what made them work so well, but they were also local. Mm-hmm. They were about a day or like Danny and the Dinosaur is just about this, like, it's a sad ending where the dinosaur leaves at the end because he has to. But you've really just gone through the emotional arc with this kid, and there isn't anything to be gleaned from it. It's just a very beautiful story, and it's got a great hook. A little boy gets a dinosaur alive, like, I'm in. Yeah. And he manages to make this really poignant emotional moment, and then he brings that to its natural conclusion as far as he's concerned. And it's this little localized, like, energy source, right, like perpetual motion machine. Mm-hmm. But the work is very personal, and it manages to have moments of poignancy in the storytelling. But there's also just like a kind of a workaday tone to how they're made, and even their presentation and their design and their production and the trim and everything about it feels not disposable, but just more like this is one of like 30 we're going to put out kind of thing. And there can be valid moments and valid books inside that tone. But I always liked those books best when I was little. And I always seemed to relate to making them more. When as soon as I got, notoriety or some sort of weight in me, I did worse under those circumstances, be like, well, now I really have to show up and do something. Like, I just remember feeling miserable under that kind of pretense. Yeah. Like the book with Jess is called Abner and the Bubblegum Balloon. And it's about a kid who can't blow bubblegum bubbles. And so the kids make fun of him. Like as far as I'm concerned, like the most straight up,
except for Donald, obviously.
Except for Don. Yeah, he should have been in the book. And like, I just get so much out of the books that have that kind of like, this was, one of the 6 books Sid Hoff made that year. Maybe they just feel quick on their feet and they weren't labored over, but they're still happy accidents, and maybe not accidents. Maybe he really set out for those moments. I can never know, but like, I'd rather find them in that speed than have it feel like I worked 10 years to finally uncover a diamond underneath. Like, I just want to be making more stuff. I want to be working faster.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of answers to that question, but I think you're familiar with Johnny Rodari, right?
Yeah.
There's this, I forgot what the book is called. Something about something of fantasy, the grammar of fantasy.
Yeah.
But he has this quote about the book, and he says, I hope that this small volume will prove useful to all those who believe it is necessary for the imagination to have a place in education, who have faith in the creativity of children, and who know the liberating value of the word. That, I think, should be the approach anyone who wants to make children's books should take. That doesn't mean that you can't do fart jokes. You can absolutely do fart jokes. You can absolutely murder your characters. You can do everything in between. There is a book for every kid. Period.
Yeah, I think that's tricky too, right? Is when you try and swallow the entire marketplace, it doesn't exist. And so
exactly.
But you, I don't know. All you can do is what you think is objectively fun and exciting, right? And so you are in a certain way trying to swallow as many people as possible and get them as much. But as soon as you get more comfortable with the idea that this is going to find its audience, and if you can hope that the publisher is okay with that too, right? The whole thing that makes it possible that they are also all right with a niche, not a niche, but like, that this isn't going to grab everybody, but it'll grab a useful amount of people.
Right.
I've found actually that in the last couple of years, I've been making board books, and I made a longer chapter book. I haven't made a picture book in actually a long time. I think partly because it's sort of...
You'd be pretty good at it.
I think it's the hardest one though, because it's so broad. I made The Skull, which was like kind of a weird short chapter book. And I remember luxuriating in the fact that even a little bit, my audience in my head was a little bit narrower than it normally was. Yep. I thought I was aiming at like 2nd or 3rd graders with that one-ish. Just around the time I remember really getting into reading, I was aiming for that kid. And so with that brief, which is narrower, right, than a picture book, they're going to hand it to newborns, and they're going to hand it maybe to 2nd or 3rd graders, or who knows, up the chain. You meet all sorts of ages of kids, and you're like, how do I grab that entire group or do my best to do it? And here was this book that format-wise, at least, reminded me of stuff, a very specific time. And I loved that specific brief. I love a tight rule. Give me a little crowd to hit and a little target to hit, and now I know why I'm making certain decisions. Mm-hmm. And so when The Skull was over, I remember being like, I loved that more specific brief. I don't think I have the stamina to do that. Book took forever, and I was exhausted by the end of it. It was just so much material when I wasn't used to that. But the narrower brief was cool. And so another version of that was board books, because again, you aren't giving that to a 5-year-old. You're giving it, like, you're reading it to a newborn. You're mostly reading it to maybe kids who can't read yet. They're being read to. You're pretty sure of that. You also are reading to potentially an audience that doesn't need a story or a character problem. So how do you do that? But like the narrow audience that you're pretty sure of became so much more interesting. And that was because, I had some marching orders now. And I found I made work so much more quicker too. I pumped out is the wrong word, but it does feel like that in comparison. I made like 4 picture books in the span of like 10 years. And I've made it more than that in the past 2 years because I've got this narrower audience in my head, and I'm more comfortable with that.
Yeah, if I were synthesizing everything that you and I have been talking about for the past 15 or 20 minutes down to like a sentence or two, I would say most, if not all, children's book creators would do well to essentially think of a children's book, whatever format, as a vehicle, a way of communicating to a child from you, hey, this is interesting to me. Let me tell you about it.
Yes. And actually and even the work is an exploration as to why. You can begin a book with the vague thought that something is interesting. And what they're watching you do is explain to yourself why it's interesting, or to explore why it's interesting. You don't even have to know going in. But but the work of it, what makes those days interesting to you, so that you're not just coloring lines that were already clear to you when you began the project, but what makes the thing alive is that you are yourself explaining to yourself in real time over the pages why you like this thing, why you have a crush on this subject or this place or this palette or any of it, all of it, hopefully. Right. And they're watching you deep in the jungle with a machete, hacking through this mystery. And that's recorded on the page somehow. That's the experience of reading the book, is you're watching this person like explore it for the first time, or at least in this way for the first time. And like when you grab that, it's like, yeah, they can feel it. They're with you.
Absolutely. I can hear the fan on my computer starting to turn up. Which my computer's 11 years old, and it's been with me through thick and thin. But I can hear it. It's starting to strain under the weight of this conversation. No, I'm kidding. I've been workshopping this sort of theory over the last few weeks or months with illustrators I talk to. This idea that I don't know if I'm right, but it sounds right. It feels right. So I thought I'd run it by you and see if maybe you can cancel it or support it. Most, if not all, but let's just stick with picture books. But I would say all children's books. But let's just stick with picture books because I think it applies a little bit more succinctly to that. You know what? I'm not going to hedge. All children's books.
All right.
Essentially speak to a defining moment in a character's, okay, we can't say all, virtually all, defining moment in a character's day, week, month, year, or life. That story, once it's complete, becomes an indelible memory for that character in that world. That character lives on beyond your book. And that story that you've just told becomes an indelible memory for that character, assuming the book has a character. See how it's like, it's a little clunky. I could streamline the wording a little bit, but I feel like that's, and anytime I run any book through that simulation, it works. Corduroy, Where the Wild Things Are, Ferdinand, Peter Rabbit, so on and so forth.
I think that what interested me actually really a lot about board books specifically is that they were the exception to that rule, or they could be, or they were allowed to be the exception to that.
Right.
One of my big problems to solve when I got into books was that I was a set and prop guy very happily and deliberately. I didn't draw characters. I didn't like characters. I didn't want to assume.
Is drawing still a tense and difficult thing for you, as you described it earlier?
Huge. Yeah. I mean, on the better days, it's not. Yeah, on the better days, it's not. I think that what I try to do is find materials that I like the look of just inherently, and so I don't mind drawing. But it's certainly not my favorite part. But it wasn't. It's not a physical aversion. It's an intellectual one. And I always viewed people and myself and the population generally as kind of unknowable to me. I'm not in the business of figuring out what people are about to do, or gaming that out. I'm just not good at it. I have no interest in it. I don't think it's possible for me specifically. And so when I started to do books and my agent said, you should do your own. And I said, well, okay, I've got this idea about a chair. He's like, I don't know if that's gonna, I think, Jon, you gotta make a character. And I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. I've been avoiding this the whole time. The only books I'd done up to that point were Cat's Night Out, which was not a character book. It's about a bunch of closed-eyed, and I closed their eyes myself. That's how much aversion I had to characters. I closed everybody's eyes in that book because I couldn't take it. I couldn't have a character. The next one was The Dark, which was also a study in blankness. Laszlo in The Dark, but the Lemony Snicket book, is a statue placed in various sets. He has no emotional, visible reaction to things, which I think is necessary for that story. If he was freaked out, it'd be too much. But I necessarily designed the story that way with him to be like, I need a book where this guy is just going to be a Lego man, basically, put in these places. And that's as much character as you're going to get out of me. And so it turns out that when I made my own, no one was more surprised than me that it was only characters. I had to flip my interests. I couldn't balance character and set and place. I Want My Hat Back, and those hat books are character-based completely. There's no setting. There's no visual atmosphere almost at all in I Want My Hat Back, because I had to flip it. But they're still stoic. They're still statues, and they're still just standing there. I think I approached it like they were unknowable. Those guys, I don't know their life yesterday. Animals, it's the same as when you see a squirrel in the street. I don't know his whole deal. I don't know the majesty of his life or what the moments are. It's none of my business, and I'm never going to know. I get him for that day to put on a hat and please be in my book on page 4. That's what I get of him. Gotcha. And so my approach to character very necessarily has always been very distant. Me knowing what a character would do, or even beginning a project that way, to be like, here, I've got this one idea for a character. I never have an idea for a character. That's not where I start. I find, I think they remind me of people once I start to get into it, but very deep into the process do I begin to find out who these guys are and what they would say.
Are any of your characters scratching their chest while they talk?
Probably the bear is because I was just in love with that Jungle Book movie.
I would imagine the bear.
Yeah, exactly. But what I wanted the whole time was to go back to see if I could pull off or have an excuse or a technical way of achieving the chair book that I pitched to my agent in the very first. And these board books, what I found is that they are not expected to have a character. They do have characters in them, but they don't have lines. They don't have problems, really, even. There's nothing to solve in the book that's character-based. These books can begin and middle and end, hopefully, feel that they have those things without a character presenting a problem or solving one, or even if they remember that day. I think, and they are almost examinations of a place or a thing or an object. They are us walking 360 degrees around something that is not moving and may not even know you're there. And I've been really interested in getting to that and in seeing if that can work for an audience that has no hangups the way I do about this. And can I make that a complete thing for them? Can I walk around something that does not have a problem and make that a book? And finally, I've got these little board books that I think begin to scratch at that a little bit. And it's been really exciting. Yeah. But to your point, I think that's right. And it's been the thing that has made me slow on books for my whole career, is that it's very hard for me to do that. And I think you're right though, often in a film, it'll feel that way too. It's why this day? Why are we being shown this day? And when a film or a book doesn't work, it's because they didn't adhere to that. They didn't respect the audience enough to show you a very important day. Right? They were just like, you know what? I don't have to. I'm better than that. I'm going to just make a thing and we're going to just enjoy the craft of my observation of this. And it comes off as arrogant. We are in the business of entertaining. Why am I being shown this day? Show me why. And I think that's a really important rule. And I don't think that, hopefully, my aversion to it or my discomfort with it isn't because I feel like I'm better than it. It's just that I'm a very sensitive flower and I want things to be quiet. A very important day is not quiet most of the time. Right. It's too loud for my little flower petals. It's just, can I make something that feels visually complete and musically complete without maybe showing the most important day of someone's life? How many important days of someone's life can I make up without, getting pretty intimidated and tired myself?
Yeah.
Again, it's the comfort zone thing, right? You're digging down into your comfort zone. I don't necessarily want to be in the business of illustrating 7 or 8 most important days of someone's life or coming up with what that might be. Maybe I'm too delicate for that and I got to take care of it. And so you're wandering deeper and deeper into that comfort zone rather than anything else. But I think, that it's true. Narratively, if you are concerned with character, that it ought to be a day that character would remember on his deathbed, for sure.
I know we're an hour 40 in. I just realized macaroni. I have a question for you about mental health, but I might just leave that out.
We can do it. It's on my mind these days for sure.
All right. I often talk about mental health on this podcast because I had a several year relationship with deep clinical, scary depression. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say it's totally gone. I would say it's 97.5% gone, and the other 2.5% is in the back corner of my mind. And every now and then he lets me know that he's there.
Yeah.
You've mentioned just being sad a lot in this episode. Delicate flower. I don't know. As a depressive, I'm proud of my depressive badge right here on my lapel. Actually, it's on my hat. I don't know. I don't even know how to ask this question, but would you say you have a relationship with depression?
Not anything that's been diagnosed. I think that the emotional range that I have was established really early on.
Same.
I think that, and not because of anything, I think it was, maybe I was just fragile, or maybe you just feel it harder than some people are built to feel it. And I don't think that as I've gotten older, I've gone through things that have made me any sadder than things I would have than the depths of which I would have sunk to pretty early. And so I want to take care of that guy. I think that's a lot of the work. I remember feeling so brave when I finally started to read scary stuff because I could. Mm-hmm. I found not only that I could, I enjoyed it. I was seeking it out, and I was shocked that I was. And I felt so good finally to have found a thing with books in particular where I was brave and where I could, because there's that contradiction, or it feels like a contradiction, where you're interested in darkness and you're interested in what that all is because you know it's real and you need to explore it to make sure that you're right, but you were scared. And so how do you do both things? How do you explore this thing when you've seen examples of it that are out to be aggressive to you? So much of what's meant to be scary is doing it in a way that's meant to push you down. Mm-hmm. And I never wanted to do that. I wanted to say, can we explore the things I know are there in people and in the world without an aggressive way of doing that, without saying, I know this and you don't yet. The position to children to be like, I know you know, and we're going to walk around in it. The real work of the writing and of the tonal illustration and the design and all of it is meant to take your hand very gently, hopefully in a trustworthy way, to be like, you can come with me and we're going to walk around in here. I'll show you some stuff. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm showing it to you for the first time. And so I think it comes into it. But again, this isn't a preoccupation, and you don't set out. That's not the goal. I think it just ends up being the result of your preoccupations, right? That's what marked you the deepest. And so you're going to make books about it. But I don't set out to be like darkness and all, like those words aren't on my bulletin board. They're not there. Right. Very early on, again, I was pretty lucky in the success of the books. And so I was given latitude to follow my nose subject-wise. And it just kept going over there. And I don't pretend to know
fear, death, existentialism.
Yeah, and this isn't. I don't have these things on my desk, as I say, as lists of things to check off that I'm going to push for in children's literature. I don't start that way. It's just these are the things. Again, it's none of my business why these things excite me. Really, I don't have a clear memory of why exactly, or even the specific moments. You sort of remember the Richter scale of your childhood, right? You remember those inflection points were there. But my memories of them and what would have caused them are pretty fuzzy, and actually probably much smaller than I would have guessed. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they might have been small. Yeah. Everyone's reacting differently, and what marks you or what stays with you, I think we've learned, hopefully, in a pretty broad way, especially in the last little while, that trauma is pretty relative, and we have to respect that. And it doesn't matter if it seems small to you, or if you hear someone say something, you're like, well, that doesn't sound so bad. We don't get to do that.
No, we don't.
And so I don't even get to do it to myself. Like, I don't know what, the things that scare me now are pretty unpredictable. You're like, wow, that really set me down. Well, I wonder why. And even just that, even just exploring that feeling of, I wonder why that scared me so bad, is a piece of work. I don't have an answer, but we're going to sit down and say, like, that's a day though. And to illustrate that feeling and to be like, I've had that day, the confirmation of that, not that you're telling kids that someday you're going to have a scary day and feel like you're authoritative about it, but to be like, I know. And the kids would be like, I know. That's what I try to do, is just this nod across the table being like, yep, you're right.
Yep.
And I think that, I think for me, that started pretty early on. And I don't want to pretend, there were lonely moments, certainly, but I never felt an objective view on it. I never felt like unlucky or that this could have gone differently, or like, why am I feeling this way all the time? I'd like to feel different. It was just the way it was. And I don't have those as much anymore. I've gotten lucky in my circumstance in my life, and I'm very happy, and I've got work I love and all that stuff. And so, but I remember the Richter scale, and you do work that explores it, that walks back over those lines and those bumps from this kind of relatively safer position.
Yeah.
And that's the work. And like, that's the whole thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't mean to say this as if it's the first time it's ever been said, but what we create tends to be a conscious or subconscious reflection of what's going on in there. And by there, I'm pointing to my head.
Yeah.
And my heart.
Yeah. No, I've found, and this is a different way of putting it. I saw an interview with a very young Anthony Hopkins a little while ago. I don't know why it got put, those things get put mysteriously into your feed. And I think he was still a theater guy when he was already.
I have cute cat videos on my algorithm.
Yeah. So. Why I get young Anthony Hopkins is the algorithm's business and not mine. But but it was him. I think he was big on the London theater scene, and that's why they were talking. Okay. It was like a cable channel interview or something. And they were like, why are you so good, Anthony Hopkins, at this? And he was really interesting. He had his calm tone already, that whole thing. But he said, it's because I'm very angry. I'm furious. And I don't want to pretend that I'm walking around angry and furious. I'm very happy, actually. But I know I'm furious. That's why the work is the way it is that on the better days, I'm able to, I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember, but like he's basically saying like he's able to access that. And he's like, I don't know I don't know why, but I am furious. I related really hard to that. It was like, if I was like sad as a younger kid or whatever it was, I think that the clarifier was that I'm actually extremely angry in the way things are and the way they continue to be and the way we can't seem to pull ourselves out of it. And my best moments, my best creative moments, my best books, all of it comes out of when it's not that I understand why, but there's somehow the lens focuses, all those little lenses come into alignment on the white heat of the fury. And then I can write. And I don't understand how those subjects address the thing I'm angry at. Sometimes maybe, but it's not the feeling. And you don't want the books to be angry, and you don't want to, of course, be angry in the face of children. But it's like, even the happy ones, there is something it's addressing where I'm deeply upset at the way things are. And I remember it coming out like that. Even before I read that, I was like, and you worry about it too a little bit, right? Because I don't want to be the sendak to another kid where it scares him. And he was so angry too, right? He was furious. Like, I think that's what put me off of those books. And so I do worry about it, that it's this unexamined fuel. And I don't want to, it gets buried in those lines in those books. I know it does. And so you don't want that to be your calling card. And even if I don't examine it, I don't want those books to do that to kids. And so I do worry about it, but I know it's there. I know that in the better moments and in the best work, I'm really angry at the way things are.
Yeah. Gosh, this is another 3.5 hour long conversation.
Yeah.
I relate to that so hard. I wouldn't say I'm an angry person.
Me neither. No.
A well of anger that I can tap into like 1%. Just like a little droplet.
Yeah, right.
That, and it gets me going. And that's why I go on rants and cuss on podcasts. And there's something about the way things are, the way like other personal reasons why I sometimes have fury that tends to flood in when I sort of tap back into my abandonment and depression days. Then fury and anger start filling in those gaps before I can feel really sad about it.
Well, I think that's one thing you do learn too, right? Is that like
fictional therapist.
The things you're angry or upset or sad about, micro and macro things in your life are there's a lot of overlap between people's reactions to broad movements that they feel the world is going through, and then the micro reactions they have to seemingly smaller things. But we only have so much equipment to register these things. And that's why, again, you're not really in the business of saying, well, that's a big deal and that should be a small deal. All we have is our reactions to these things, and we just got to take care of ourselves in it. And so you don't get to say what's big and what's small, but you do know, that you're upset. And I think it's reasonable to be upset. I don't think that it sounds a little bit scary to be like, you're making things for children and you're saying your fuel is anger. But it's like, we reasonable people you have to function and you have to get groceries and pick up your kids and play video games with them and be gentle and everything. Yeah. But also, it's reasonable. This is a reasonable reaction. And we don't find outlets for it. It's frustrating. Yeah. That's a lot of the anger, is that we don't have ways of helping, the situation, or you feel powerless. And so when it does find this way, and you found a safe way to do it, and you found a way that kids can even relate to, because your kid is mad about some stuff too, guaranteed. Yeah. And when they recognize even just that general sentiment and a pressure release or some sort of escape valve for that energy, very vaguely, it doesn't have to address the specific problem, but the book as catharsis is a huge deal for me too. I don't know what the story is about. I don't know what we're managing to message or say, but I know I feel better. I got something out of my system by page 42. That in and of itself, as maybe the only reason for it. Did you facilitate that? Can we make it stronger? Can we open that valve a little wider so that we feel like we got even more out of our system? That as a mechanism for your decision making, rather than did the character solve its problem? Most of my characters don't solve their problems, or at least not in a way I would get behind. But the energy is released in the end. For better or for worse, it is. Yeah, it's a mysterious process, but it's very interesting too.
Well, I think we've covered quite a bit today.
I feel Don, productive.
Wherever you are, Don. Remembering that we do have illustrators, writers, folks who want to be book creators listening in on this. What would you say to the folks who are still with us here about their illustration and writing business? What should they be focusing on? What word of advice do you have, or what word of wisdom would you like to share with them directly?
Oh, that's always hard.
Get angry.
Well, not necessarily. Yeah, but it's also personal. I think that taking care of yourself in the work is important. Mm-hmm. Don't let it beat you up. Don't let them beat you up. Don't let the whole thing beat you up. Be fiercely protective of yourself in the work. In fact, that is the work, is that you are being a fierce protector of yourself and people like you. And that strength will be the work. It will also be your stock in trade. The better you get at that, and the stronger a shield you are to yourself. It looks like, and it is, a statement. And what you search around, you cast around for what makes that stronger. So it is the work, and it isn't clear right away. But protect yourself hard, and that's mainly it.
You can find Jon, his links, and his books on Instagram. If you find value in this podcast, consider becoming a patron. In return, you can access bonus episodes, receive invitations to our Art Directors After Hours series, and get a 10% off discount code for all ID offerings. Become a patron by visiting patreon.com/illustrationdept. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.